What's up, Matthew Durham?
Hey, Clint.
So I did about a 2-minute intro there because I wanted to make sure I set up and kind of got the why of this thing out of the way, why I wanted to bring you on. But the conversation with Eric Buchanan yesterday went great. I thought I had a lot of good private feedback. People saying they really enjoyed it. Again, who would have thought in America we live in a time where having a conversation would have, civilly would have been applauded. Way to go, guys. You didn't call each other names.
The bar is very low right now.
It is very low. But here's what I want you to do. And I know you explained it yesterday. Can you explain to people kind of what you do and then pull that into the research you did? Because that's where I want to spend our time a little bit on the research itself. And then I'm just going to ask you some questions based off that.
Sure. So around 2015 or so, 2015, 2016, I was having conversations with several of my friends and sort of paying attention to how the conversation was going on social media and as we were ramping up to the 2016 election especially. And I realized that a couple of my friends, one of whom was very, very on the left, right? You can go down sort of the intersectional checklist and check off most of the, if not all of them, right? Even wanted to join Antifa, but there wasn't a local Antifa organization, right? And then I had another friend who was very, very far on the right. Even KKK tried to recruit him. It didn't work very well because his wife was Jewish. But both of them, like I should say, neither of them would ever be willing to talk to each other, right? But they would both be willing to take a bullet for me. And realizing that there's something just clicked in my head, and I thought something's gone wrong, right? This needs a closer look. And I ended up leaving my job in cancer research and going into psychology research, getting here at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, explicitly for the purpose of trying to understand how we can shift that, how we can look at some ways to, even if we can't get the people that are on the far, 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 far extremes to talk to each other, maybe at least we can get people a little bit closer or more willing to actually have conversations in which they could begin to understand, hopefully, that maybe we're not quite as different as we all think we are. So that was sort of my feeling going into it. And I elected to do what is not really done very often in this kind of research, where you're trying to, I guess, ultimately, it's sort of about reducing prejudice based on political perspectives, right? I elected to try to get liberals and conservatives to come in and talk to each other, direct one-on-one conversations. And I started that process last year in March, just as COVID hit. So I had to switch that up a little bit. I couldn't bring them in for in-person conversation. So we switched over to video conference, and I brought in 28 people, paired them up randomly with each other, and gave them the opportunity to have a 20-minute conversation with each other, not knowing who they were going to be talking to, what they were going to be talking about. Oh, I can't hear you, Clint.
There you go. I unmuted myself. I muted myself so I don't interrupt, because I fidget and I didn't want anybody to hear my pen click or anything like that. So they volunteered to come in. So I didn't know this part of it, but they did not know that they were going to be talking to someone with different views, or they did. Okay.
They did know that the person was going to be on the other side of the political spectrum, but they didn't know who they would be talking to.
Gotcha. Okay.
Or what they would be talking about.
Gotcha.
That's all they knew.
Okay.
I recruited mostly through Craigslist, so it was a pretty good cross-section of different kinds of folks.
Well, and Zoom allowed you to kind of jump in geographically to pull from probably get different perspectives than if it had been in person, right?
Yes. So I had several folks who actually live down near or down in the Southwest of the United States. I had people down in Louisiana, up in New York, all over all over the place. And what I ended up having them do, I split them into 3 groups. The first group was my attempt at what we call a control condition, right? So this is just trying to be as neutral as possible. And I had them talk about, or I asked them to talk about their favorite activity, right? Their favorite thing to do with their time. And it could have, for a lot of folks, it was sports or bicycling or music or whatever, right? The second group, I wanted them to talk about immigration. And the third group, I again asked them to talk about immigration, but before they could start to have that conversation, I asked them first to state their own position on immigration. Then the other person had to summarize their position to their satisfaction, and then they had to switch roles. The other person tells you, or states their position, and then you have to summarize theirs to their satisfaction. Then the remainder of the time they could talk about immigration. So it was helpful to have some folks who actually lived down in the American Southwest, right? Because in many cases they had personal experience dealing with the border, and recently, people who have just recently come over the border, legally or illegally, and kind of how that impacts culture. And so yeah, Craigslist was suggested to me by a colleague, and it turned out to be absolutely brilliant.
Are you comfortable as we go along? I just want to interject, ask a few questions, or do you want to wrap it up and then we can do it? So 2 questions I have. One is to the other person's satisfaction. What's just, and I kind of, some of these will be rhetorical questions, but explain to me why. What's the purpose of making sure the other person states it to the other person's satisfaction? That's the key, not stating it, but till the other person gives it the check mark.
Exactly. Yeah. The idea there was to prevent people from what we call straw manning, right? From operating based upon assumptions of what the other person believes that they don't actually hold. And if you can get them to commit, right, to the effort of intentionally, carefully listening to what that person is saying, and then having to put it in their own words, and then having to also put sort of their summary into the hands of the other person and saying, did I do well, right? It validates not only each person's understanding of the other, right? But it also forces them into sort of this position, maybe not forces, but it heavily encourages them to be in a very active listening mode, right? To try to get past their assumptions and genuinely listen, because if they don't, they will mess up, and the other person will tell them that wasn't an accurate summary.
Yeah, I try to simplify things in my pea brain as much as possible. And when I hear you talk about this, it's, in the gym, when we used to go work out, I've been instructed and I've instructed people. And if you're doing a lift and you're not doing it right, a good instructor will force you to do it with good form, slow and intentional. And usually you can't lift as much weight if you've gotten in the habit of doing it wrong. And it sounds to me like when you start forcing people to use the good habit of listening, it forces the unlazy part of your brain to kind of, you can't be lazy listener and regurgitate it back to somebody to their satisfaction. You can't have those two. So it's almost like correcting someone's listening form. Like, you have to listen, but with good form.
Right.
Which takes effort, and you just got to be patient. And you've got to listen with, like you said, the intent of, I got to make sure I say it like Matthew likes. We don't like that in the world we live in. I just want to tell you what I saw on my headline news and prove that you're wrong.
Yeah, it pushes people away from the sort of gotcha mentality, right? Of I've got in my head who and what you are based purely upon what I've been told is your political affiliation, right? They weren't even told how far to the right or the left the person on the other side was. It could very well have been someone who was slightly left of center talking with someone who's slightly right of center, but they didn't know that either, right? So I tried to minimize as much as I could what they knew about each other going in, just so that they would have to actively listen.
Well, so the first part, I want to go through these segments again. So the first part of the conversation is they talk about just kind of trivial things.
Yeah, like what's your favorite leisure activity?
Okay.
Yeah.
Then they listen to the other person state their opinion. They say it back to them. Then the other person returns the favor.
That was the third condition.
The
Yeah.
third. Okay. So when did you say the leftover is they start? They just finish like whatever's remaining in the 20 minutes. They just talk about. Did you go back and watch all the videos? I'm sure you did, right?
Yes.
Who initiated that? My brain went to, I wonder at the end of it if the air quote conservative or liberal was the one when they were done initiated the remaining conversation, if you found a passive or aggressive trait that was dominant one side or the other.
I did not analyze that particular question, but that is an interesting question, and now I want to.
Well, it seems to, and I hate to say this, but it seems to me, and it would be interesting to know, unfortunately, we live in this world. Social media has trained us to be winners and losers in arguments, which you stated so well on the podcast with Eric and I yesterday, that most important conversations about policies and procedures and our documents and the world we live in, those are open-ended, ongoing conversations. Even in science, there are some things that are pinned and pointed, closed up, but even they are getting evaluated all the time, right? Very little closed. So, but I juxtapose that with the world we live in nowadays, where I showed you a headline, so you're wrong. And it makes me wonder, whoever feels they won the conversation, I wonder if they would have been the one to probably jump in. And I'd love to keep talking about this right now because I've got you on the ropes. You see how my devious brain works? Sorry, man. I threw you a monkey wrench.
No, and then I think when we get to the results, some of that will tie in as far as how people reacted to those conversations.
Look, let's go down that path unless there's something we missed about how you got there. You fill in the gaps for me. It's your research.
Yeah. So first condition, just talking about leisure activities. Second condition was talking about immigration. And third was the summary active listening task, followed by spend the rest of the 20 minutes talking about immigration. And I looked at, when I went to do the analysis, well, I should say there's one other piece that is significant. Once they finished that 20-minute conversation, I then interviewed each of them individually. Just me and each person, right? And it was, in most cases, it was immediately after that conversation, right? We just picked one person and I'd roll a dice or something and we'd start with them and then do the other person. So then I asked them a series of questions about their impressions of the conversation, right? How did you feel about the conversation? What's the value of these kinds of conversations, if any? What should be done to improve these kinds of conversations, that kind of stuff. And then I took every bit, every word that was said in every single one of those conversations and in my interviews with each of those people, and I got them transcribed into text. And from there, I was looking at what are these folks talking about, number one, and how are they talking, right? What's are there differences in the different conditions, and also maybe between conservatives and liberals in how they talk in these conversations? I didn't necessarily set out to answer all of those questions, but I had this wealth of conversational data, and I wanted to actually explore what's happening here, right? This is kind of new territory in the research world. I don't know of anyone else that's done anything like this at this level. So I'm in new territory, but I'm effectively, I took two approaches to those transcripts that I had. One, I coded every single bit of text, right? Just to see, what are they doing here? Are they talking? Are they expressing admiration for the other person?
Define coding for us that aren't in.
Yes.
What does coding mean?
Yeah. Sorry. Categorizing the data, right?
Okay.
So I might look at a statement from one of the participants, and it might say, Yeah, I actually brought over. This is a real example. I brought over and hosted a refugee because they were being persecuted in their home country for deconverting away from Islam. This was one of my conservative participants who was bringing this up as sort of I don't know, establishing bona fides, maybe, right? Like this is I'm showing you that I care about immigrants, right? Or I had another conservative who actually went to one of the border countries near Syria and was assisting at some of these immigration camps where that's as influxes of people from Syria were coming in. So in both of those cases, right, they're sharing an anecdote or they're sharing a fact about themselves. And so I would categorize that as sharing fact or anecdote. Okay. And then just coded everything. And then I also went through and I had a computer program look at common terms and phrases, the most common terms and phrases. And what I found was that overwhelmingly the idea of common ground was showing up, both in how I was categorizing the data and in the computer analysis of common words and phrases, right? That all of it just kept coming up over and over and over again. And I didn't find a single term or phrase or, I didn't find a single term or phrase that was negative in terms of like its emotional aspect, right? Mm-hmm. Everything was positive, every single bit of it. And in fact, when I asked them what ways we could improve these conversations, the most common responses were, I want more time. The conversation wasn't long enough, right? Or I wanted some more structure to the conversation.
Was there any follow-up on what structure meant by that when they said that?
It varied. It could be things like, I wanted to know what the topic was going to be in advance. It would have been nice to have you, Matthew, present during the conversation so you could kind of help guide us. It would have been nice if there were specific questions that you wanted us to address, because immigration is a huge topic, right? And I should probably specify why I chose immigration.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of like hot topics out there that political or that liberals and conservatives tend to disagree on.
Wait. You think there's more than one? It's not just immigration?
It's a crazy world we live in, Clint. But yeah, I mean, I could have gone for abortion or, LGBT issues or race stuff. Who knows? Anything, anything and everything was up for grabs. But I wanted something that I could be reasonably confident that there would be disagreement on, just on the basis of someone being liberal or conservative, but that wouldn't result in people getting super, super angry at each other. I'm probably going to go down some of those other routes in the future.
Well, let me ask you this then.
We'll see.
Well, some of the structure things that they suggested, and then we'll go back to the things that more of the post interviews. Were there ideas that you liked that you're going to try to implement, or were there stuff that you didn't put in place on purpose? Like, I didn't want you to know the topic because I didn't want you to have an argument set up and ready to go. I want your natural. Are there things though you're going to implement moving forward that you would do different?
There are ultimately going to be several things that I'm going to change. I can appreciate why they wanted to know up front what the topic was. A lot of folks felt like they kind of were a deer in the headlights, right? Like a lot of them didn't feel super comfortable or confident coming up with, what their position on immigration was, right? And just kind of having that thrown at them. And that's fair, and I would probably feel the same way in their place. But I wanted, to your point, I did want it to be as authentic and as spontaneous as it possibly could be. I didn't want people coming in prepared to argue on a topic. I wanted them prepared to have a conversation. That's how it was presented from the beginning.
Right.
Having me in the room with them, right, in the Zoom call, no. I don't think, again, I understand why they might have wanted it, but I want this to be as much as possible just two people talking to each other.
Yeah, that's the one when you said, I thought the other was I would have entertained maybe and can see, but the one wanting you there as a policeman or a referee, if I agree with you. I mean, this isn't, I need to see how the big cats act in the cage when the trainer's not there. I need to see how y'all, that's the purpose of all of a sudden you're controlling the control, but that would be you manipulating how they're doing it. And I don't think that would have been very beneficial for this, in my opinion. But yeah. So anyway, I interrupted you.
Yeah, no, but to answer for the one thing that I think I almost certainly will be taking on board as a suggestion that almost 30+% of my participants made was, if not more, they wanted more time. They really wanted to talk longer. These 20 minutes was just not enough. And I got recommendations anywhere from 25 to 45 minutes.
And this was 28 people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was one of the sort of, we call that the qualitative results. That's non-numbers based results where you're looking at text, you're looking at conversation on a page, and or you're listening to it on a video and watching body language and things like that. The other piece of it was what we call the quantitative, and that was the more numbers based, right? So you give someone a survey and they answer a bunch of things, and then you sort of tabulate the results and see what changed before and after, that sort of thing. And I gave people several of those individual components of a larger survey, testing things like their inclination towards taking on the perspective of someone else, or their inclination towards being openness to sort of new experiences. But the big one was a scale or a survey called intergroup attitude. And that was my neutral prejudice measure. I was trying to measure, I wasn't looking for a measure of prejudice, because prejudice has this very negative connotation, right? You can't have positive prejudice. But attitude, right? That's more neutral, right? You can have a positive or a negative attitude towards someone. And I chose what we call a feelings thermometer. It's where, you say, okay, how do you feel about Clint? Somewhere between warm and cold, right? And there's like a 7-point scale. And then you see how much did that get more towards the positive or more towards the negative after the conversation, because they filled out those answers about people on the other side of the political spectrum.
Right.
In general, right? So I wanted to not only see how they felt about the conversation and the person that they were talking to, but I also wanted to see if it was having any influence at all on how they thought about the other side generally. And what came out of that analysis is that all three conditions were more likely than unlikely to result in an improvement of intergroup attitude. You could also say a reduction in prejudice. The condition that had the largest increase for intergroup attitude was the one with the summary task. Second was the just talk about immigration. And then third was sort of the control condition where you're just.
All right. Well, this is where you get to be the expert, even though we talked yesterday about the death of the expert. I consider you an expert. So now when you gave this thermometer, this feelings thermometer, that was after the whole thing, right? Or was it between? Because how did you measure that between the three segments? Was the thermometer given in increments, or was it at the end reflecting back on each segment? I'm trying to figure out. I'm not, again, you got to boil this down to
sure.
what's left in the pan for me.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I gave it to them before they had the conversation. Mm-hmm. I gave it to them after the conversation, and then I gave it to them again 30 days later.
Okay. To
see if the effect had any kind of legs to it.
Gotcha.
And it did. It did come up on. It was a reduced effect, right? It wasn't as strong as immediately after the conversation. And these conversations, I should note, were happening between roughly May and September of last year. So, right, the election is ramping up, which of course brings with it high emotions, right, on everybody's side. So all of that's happening all at the same time.
Are you okay if I bring in questions while we talk, or do you want to keep going?
Ahead.
Because I pin in this, because right now we're at the after the interviews and we're on the emotional thermometer.
Yeah.
I want to come back to that.
Okay.
And I'm writing it down so I don't forget. But we're getting questions. So Mike asked, was any participant on the fringes of their philosophies?
So I'm going to try to state what I think Mike is asking. I don't want to assume. So Mike, you can correct me if I get this wrong. Are you asking, or I should say, I'm assuming that you're asking, were any people on the extremes?
Yes.
Like Antifa, KKK, right, level?
Yeah. Basically what he's asking, were they super one way or the other going in, and then as they left, had they pulled back more towards the middle? I think that's what he's asking.
So I did measure their political inclinations, right? And on the front end, I did not measure to see if their political inclinations or their affiliation had changed as a result of the conversation. I did have several folks who described themselves as extremely liberal or extremely conservative. What that precisely means is kind of up to each of them individually. And one of the things that would be nice in the future would be to get a more precise measurement of that. And I'm currently looking for some better ways to do so. As far as softening on their position, I don't know that they softened their broader political position, but in terms of how they felt about the other individual and the other side, I talked earlier about the categories that I had assigned. One of the other very prevalent categories that I found in multiple conditions was the category from negative to positive and from neutral to positive. Right? So they went into the conversation either expecting a negative or a neutral experience, and by the end of it, they had moved their impression to a positive one. So in that sense, I would say there was softening. And also in terms of possibly adjusting their political perspective, that I'm not.
I'll say something else too about that. This is great. I'm not part of this project at all, and then I get to make assumptions on your behalf. You're welcome, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I would assume if I consider myself extreme one way, and I'm talking with somebody that counters a point, I'm going to make some assumptions going in that you're all of these things. You know, in this world we live in nowadays, it's if you believe this, then you believe all of these. So I carry that baggage with me. If I am positive towards you a little bit when I leave that conversation, I may have an ego involved. I may not want to admit that I need to be more, compassionate when I talk with people. So I may not really just own up to it, but in the back of your mind, as a human being, you almost have to assume that once I like Matthew and I've had the experience of realizing that somebody on the other side's a human, that's got to be subconsciously sprinkled into the conversations moving forward. I don't know how you measure it, and I may just be full of crap. But with that being said, let's do another question real quick from one of our favorite people, Alexandria. What's up? What did you use what did you use to measure their political standing? Political compass test ?
I used a very basic question, and it's from Pew Research. It's a 6-point political scale from extreme to somewhat, or extreme to very, to extremely, moderately, somewhat liberal, And then I guess I also had a middle ground as well, and I unfortunately had to exclude those folks. Then somewhat moderately and extremely conservative.
You middle of the ground, normal people, you're out.
Yeah.
You cannot help us at all figure out what's wrong with the other idiots on the way extreme sides.
Useless to us.
Useless. Normal people are useless to me in research, damn it. Be gone with them. Okay, so until we get another question or comment, let's kind of go back to that emotional temperature thermometer thing you were talking about. We're talking post-interview, and you were in the process of telling us the feedback you were getting, what you could do different, what you're going to implement moving forward, and then we can kind of pick it up from there if you remember where you're at.
Yeah. Yeah, it was more time, more structure. Those were the big two things. I'm probably not going to adjust the structure of it a whole lot in the future. Mine is changing some of the questions that I'm asking. But the actual interaction, I think the only thing I would be inclined to change is, like they said, to give them more time. And I should also note, in relation to the feelings thermometer element, one other thing that I noticed, and this is when I was looking at the prevalence of certain terms or how common certain terms and phrases were in the transcripts, my liberals were using the term feel dramatically more often than my conservatives were. They also tended to use, in the discussions, but not so much in the interviews, they tended to use, liberals were referring to illegal immigrants, and conservatives were referring to illegal immigration. So it seemed as though, and this is obviously subject to confirmation and better research, but my impression was liberals are not only thinking more emotionally, and conservatives seem to be thinking more procedurally, but liberals are personalizing the actual on-the-ground individuals involved, whereas conservatives seem to be focusing more on policy. Right? How do we address this issue, as a country, as a system, whereas liberals are sort of trying to instead get inside of the head of the people that are affected by our immigration policies.
That's interesting. That's interesting because as leaning to the conservative side, I would think, and you actually said this yesterday on the podcast with Eric, and I didn't really say anything about it because the things were going good, but I think definitions are important. So compassion is an important word, but how we apply it's important, because I look at it as the compassion for, and I said this yesterday, kids in cages. I don't care if it was started under Bill Clinton or the cages were built and used by President Obama, and then Trump did it and the media really focused in on it. Trump did it. I don't care. We're America. We should know how to do something better than that. I get it. I don't understand why we go, it is what it is. We can do better. I'm not saying it's not the right thing. There's got to be some separation because kids are used certain ways. I get it, but we got to be able to do it better. But the compassion side of it is, I look at it as a conservative, and I would go, well, how about all the people that are in line doing it the right way? How about the consequences when you come in the United States and you start getting taxed off? So there's consequences. It just depends on where you put your compassion. And then, so when you start assigning, not you, but in conversations, if we assign that I'm a compassionate person because I believe this, and we talked about this, right? That bias, and you're not compassionate, maybe the other person has compassion. You just haven't asked them where's your compassion in this? And they'll go, well, how about the tax dollars? Or how about the people that are trying to come in legally? And I bet you almost 100% of conservatives, if you said to them, do you think it's right to keep kids in cages? Let them go through all the headlines, rhetoric. Well, they got to follow the rules. And they're eventually going to go, no. No. And so when you say that, the word compassion, I find that very interesting, because I could hear the conversation being, because I say it all the time, talk policies, and the other person could talk compassion and feelings. And right there, the conversation, the goals may be the same, but the conversation goes like that. We miss each other.
Yeah.
Completely. And I didn't think about this until yesterday when you said it. So I give you credit. When you said it, I got off and I was like, it's not that we're not compassionate. We're not doing a good job of showing it. There, on my little conservative rant, sir. The show is yours again.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Jonathan Haidt, who I think I mentioned in our conversation yesterday, has written on this extensively. How people who have a more conservative versus a more liberal inclination genuinely are thinking differently at the level of base, like foundations. He refers to them as moral foundations. And I don't want to get too much into his stuff right now because he explains it better than I do, and I'll probably not do it justice. But after reading, and he started out as much more on the left, and then he started talking to people on the right and going to other countries, especially visiting South America and India, and seeing that sort of the general inclination that we have in the United States when it comes to how people on the left here talk about issues of moral significance is very different than how it's talked about just about anywhere outside of North America and Europe. That in fact, people pretty much everywhere else talk about it like our conservatives do here in the United States. They draw upon effectively the same kinds of values and ideas that our American conservatives do. It's just people in Western, educated, industrialized, rich democracies, which you can shorten to the word weird people, which I'm one of them. We have sort of we've created a reduction, I guess you might say. We've reduced the number of things about which we immediately care morally. Things like purity and sanctity, right? How often do you see folks on the left making moral pronouncements about purity and sanctity? Maybe a little bit more now that COVID's a big thing, right?
But I heard a bunch of them in Bill Clinton. I worked in the radio business, and when Bill Clinton got busted for his sexcapade stuff, that's when we were labeled the family and the family values party.
Right.
And then, because I remember it came up when we nominated Trump, they were like, "Oh, the family values party's nominated this womanizer." But I was told by my friends when I was like, "Hey, Bill Clinton shouldn't be using his power like that, should he?" And I was told by my liberal friends in the radio business, and if they're watching, you know who you are. I'll call you out by name. There's two of you, but I was told, "Hey, we elected him to be our president. Nobody's perfect." I'm like, okay. And then when I see him talking about how bad Trump was, do you know how tempted I was to fall into the trap of, but I just, God took over my finger and I backspaced and I didn't send it. But I see your point a lot. And so this is I think a place to insert this. There is a tendency, because what you did, this research, I think has a great bearing on where we're at in today's world. This is very relevant, what you're doing, because there is this tendency now, and I've seen it coming a little more from the right too. I think the left is much better at it, and they do it a lot more, but they do take a moral ground. I mean, I've seen people call people, I feel morally superior to you. You can see it in how they write and their post. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I think now we're at a position where whatever we can use as a club against the other team, we're just using it as a club. So in other words, 48 seconds, just say, I see your point. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And you and I talked a little bit outside of the podcast about sort of cleaning your own house, right? And that we're not going to be typically as effective in calling out the other side and actually getting that the other folks to change than we will be in terms of calling out our own sides. And I completely understand and agree that that's almost certainly true. My only worry is that you can take that a little bit too far, right? Where you just don't engage across the chasm that currently separates us. Although, frankly, I'm strongly inclined to start thinking, as I've done my research, that chasm really isn't as big as we think it is.
That makes me feel good that you said that.
That chasm, I think it generates clicks and engagement. If you can get rage bait articles and our 2 minutes hate of the other side, that when you step away from the internet and you start talking to people directly, especially on the other side, and I saw this in my participants, I see this in my personal conversations with folks. My participants suddenly, like I said, the most common theme and common sets of phrases had to do with common ground. They were surprised. One of my favorite examples was I had a college student on the left who was white, and a immigrant conservative who was on the right, and he was black. And my liberal, when I was interviewing him, he's at the end of the interview, I asked him if there was anything else that he wanted to mention that I hadn't asked him about. And he said, and I'll briefly summarize, but he said, I was not expecting a black conservative, nor was I expecting him to, nor was I expecting a conservative to pretty much agree with me on what is concerning here. He didn't like the kids in cages either.
Who would?
Right? But he's also like an immigrant who got here, through the immigration system legally. And so he also felt some degree of discomfort that other people were able to bypass that when his family had to work so hard for him to get here. And my liberal at the end of that, after acknowledging I didn't expect either of those things, what he indicated, I'm going to have to kind of start rethinking, because he just broke all my stereotypes.
And and this is the thing about this, if there's one person that breaks the stereotype, that gives automatically there has to be the possibility for more. You don't know how many more, but you have to leave room now that maybe I'm wrong in scale, right?
Right. Maybe
I'm wrong in scale. I wrote this down too, because I don't want it to, you made a great point that if we just leave it up to the other team to correct this craziness we see out there, then we don't have conversations. What I would like is when Matthew, who can label himself as more liberal, when he sees the hypocrisy in the media and Clint stands up and say, hey, Matthew, don't you see how hypocritical that is? If me and you both go, yeah, dude, that's stupid, we shouldn't be doing that. And then when Trump says something stupid and Clint, who may have voted for Trump, goes, and Matthew looks at Clint and goes, Clint, don't you think what he said stupid? If we both can start agreeing when there's stupid things and then really pick out the things that deserve some debate, there's this good faith effort that we talked about yesterday. I trust Matthew now. So when he brings up something legit, I know he's coming at me from a place of concern, not trying to just all the time defend his position. Because then I'll just listen. Old quotes are old for a reason, but the old quote, if you come at me with clenched fist, I'm going to clench my fist. If you come at me with love, I'll come at you with love. If you're going to defend positions all day, then it's just a matter of berserk. We're just playing the game of the hockey goal. I'm just the goalie, and you'll take your shot, and then I'll take my shot. And so I agree with you, though. I think the way to help people clean up their own positions, first of all, we got to quit treating politics like it's college football. Alabama versus insert inferior team here, Roll Tide. But you're in the South now, man. That happens. Sorry, dude.
Used to it.
Yeah, I'm sure you are. Let me do this now that I went on my rant, and I apologize. I warned you up front that I get into this stuff and I will hijack the microphone, and I apologize for doing that. I'm sorry.
I'm active listening.
Let's look at you. You're practicing what you preach. What's been interesting to me, given Matthew, you would know more about this than I, that conservatives had a higher discuss sensitivity. Is that right? Because it's all muffled.
Yeah.
Factor than liberals, and theories why that may be. COVID is that? So I think I understand what she's asking, but I'm going to let you take that one. And if you need to digest it or hash it through, let me know.
Yeah. What Alexander is referring to there is, you hear about things like openness to experience or conscientiousness. These are sort of descriptions of personality traits that we have, and discussed sensitivities, something that has also been studied. And a lot of studies have found, and it's only been around, I want to say, for maybe 20 years at the most. But I'm happy to be corrected if someone knows it better than I do. And what they found is that conservatives tend to be more sensitive to experiencing disgust in relation to something that is offensive in some way.
Okay, explain that to me one more time. Say it again. Maybe I just didn't understand it the first time. I apologize.
It's the idea that you can more easily trigger a conservative to feel disgust, basically.
Just in general about a topic, or just about whatever you're talking about?
Yeah. Well, about things that are disgusting, right? So like maybe having to touch a dead snake or something. I don't know. I'm just making something up.
I got you. Yeah.
But it can also be sort of this notion of concepts that are offensive in some ways as well. I don't know how much I buy into that line of research. I think in a similar vein to how the authoritarianism research has massive blind spots when it comes to finding it on the left. I think the disgust sensitivity stuff may just not have found the stuff that disgusts liberals. And because they haven't found it, then they're not using it. And so it looks like the conservatives are more prone to experience disgust than liberals are.
I'll be honest. I think it may be one of those, like we've talked about 1,000 times. If everything's a racist, then they're nothing's racist. If everybody's a Nazi, then it dilutes what a real Nazi is. I think right now, if you use the media meter, everything discussed. Everything pisses them off, man. I mean, that's where you get the cancel culture from. I mean, maybe I'm using the wrong definition of disgust, but I don't see conservatives. I mean, they're starting to play by the same rules of last year, but for the most part, I don't see conservatives trying to boycott advertisers and trying to get people fired from their jobs. I don't see as much of that. Is that not part of the disgust umbrella, or am I not understanding?
It probably is, frankly. And you may actually be touching on the point that I was trying to get at, which is that, the research that's been done on disgust sensitivity just may not be tapping into the right stuff that actually gets the reaction from people on the left, right? And it occurred to me, what will disgust the folks on the left more than anything else right now?
Oh, hold on a second. Go ahead. I'm writing this down.
You won't have to. Trump.
Wait a minute.
Right?
What's his name again?
There's nothing that will get their hackles up. And I say that as someone who doesn't like Trump, right? But I can recognize that boy, does that get folks on my side pissed off.
You know how I can tell? Because here's how I can tell that common sense leaves the room sometimes. If you have a president, like if we were talking about Obama, and you were to list 10 things he did, if I said all 10 of those, now it depends on what 10, if you pick out the 10, but it's impossible for a leader to do everything you hate. Something for us to continue on as a country under their leadership, it's okay to give people kudos every now and then. And I don't see them willing to give kudos as a matter of fact, I see President Biden reversing things that I'm like, there's no way his side would want Trump to do that. So I understand your point, but to Alexandra's point, and then I want to go to Mike's thing, the COVID, I'm wondering, and if she's still watching, I would love to know this. I think what disgusts conservatives is being told what to do. And maybe that's what she's talking about. Wear the mask. You have to wear if you had said, hey, wear the mask because it helps your fellow citizen. If they'd have said that right up the front, maybe, but the message was so confusing. But once you start telling a conservative what to do. And again, I'm going to get in trouble. My liberal friends are going to go, we don't like to be told what to do either. But does that make sense? Being mandated that you go to your room and do this and don't do that. Maybe that's the disgust factor that she's talking about, but I don't know. I'm trying to wrap my head around it. So I'm going to read up on this disgust factor.
Yeah, disgust sensitivity. It's some interesting stuff. I think they're on to something, but yeah, there definitely do seem to me to be some rather large blind spots.
Well, and again, these interviews can be a little choppy because if we get people participating, I don't want to ignore them because, and real quick, I want to hide his because before that, I think we ought to also, thank people. Stephanie, thank you very much. We appreciate you chiming in, and I hope you enjoying the conversation. But Mike chimed in and said, Trump haters hate him personally. Regardless his policy positions, Trump supporters understand when he said stupid things, it's because he has no governor. Yeah, he has no filter. His policy positions are more important. If he governed to the left and was the Democrat, he'd been hated by the right for his policy reasons. But we'd use his misspeaks against him too. Yeah. So that's the thing that bothers me. One of the things that bothers me that I think is very superficial and it pisses me off. President Biden the other day said something about we're going to get it up to 100 million shots. And there was a misspeak in there. We were already giving out 100 million, whatever it was. Something about it was not exactly correct. When you're speaking as much as the president of the United States, I can make a collage that's an hour long of every flumber, flub, potato, 52 states, 51 states, 30, whatever. I could make a collage of all the screw ups. When you say a million words, thousands are going to come out wrong. That's the superficial crap that when I see that immediately, I go, that's you trying to get click. The argument about policy, though, as I agree, and here's why. I saw a friend of mine get called racist arguing about something. It was a policy for Barack Obama. President Obama did. But it's the same policy that Biden's going to bring back. So if I didn't like it when it was President Obama and I don't like it when it's President Biden, then you have to at least give me some room not to be a racist. Maybe it's the policy. Does that make sense? Or am I being a snowflake?
No. I was actually having this conversation with my son a few weeks ago. And to tie into your point earlier about if you're listing the 10 things that a president has accomplished and you can't name a single thing that you thought was good, something's wrong, right? And I was having this conversation with my son, and I said, look, even if you don't like someone, even if you disagree, and maybe you hate their personality because maybe you just think that they're a jerk, right? You still give the devil his due. You still have to acknowledge when they make a good decision. And I was walking with some liberal friends of mine, and they're like, wait, what could you possibly think that Trump did that you agree with?
You're going to get kicked off the team. You're going to get kicked off the team.
Well, perhaps to my credit,
come on over.
I had 4 ready to go.
Yeah.
And I said, well, let me describe each one and why I think it was actually a smart thing to do and why I would want any Democrat to do exactly the same thing. And they had some clarification questions for me, but ultimately none of the things that I listed did they disagree with.
Well, I'll throw a caveat out there about President Obama and policy stuff. Maybe, that'd be a wormhole I don't want to go down, but I could find some. But I just think, and I'm talking about his demeanor. I just wish President Trump had a little of the presidential air about him. I wish he was more careful with his words. I wish he was a little easier on his demeanor. And I'm not saying you can't push back on the press, which I think is just gone back crap crazy, but it would have been nice if he had sprinkled in a little more of, I'd need respect because it's the presidential office. Well, with that comes some, I think, higher expectations. I didn't like a lot of the buffoonery that came from the comments all the time. You know how it is. Garlic is good in a meal. If you put too much garlic in a meal, though, it ruins the meal.
Right.
And I think he threw too much garlic in an otherwise decent meal, and it made people's stomach hurt. People were like, eventually like, look, man, just stop tweeting, dude. Just Can we listen?
Right.
I don't think tweeters. I don't think Twitter should have got him off. I don't agree with that. But for the love of Pete, just have a 48 fast on Twitter and watch how much better your world would have gone, sir. Alexander said, yes, I would agree with that statement, generally speaking, Clint. So I think she was talking about the disgust factor for the conservatives are you're going to be told what to do. Even these daggum conversations, Matthew, go from one thing to the next and it's never ending. But even when we go back to what we were talking about, the experts, even when the experts don't agree, you know, I was listening to a podcast today that had a collage of Fauci, Dr. Fauci, and taking all the stuff he said about, hey, don't wear a mask. It's silly to wear a mask during viruses. That's not going to do you any good. It may make you feel more protected, and then it juxtaposed it with now. And there's some of that is true, right? Some of that is, you know, he throws the pitch out with his mask on, then he goes sits in the stands with his friends and he doesn't have the mask on. Governor Newsom tells everybody you can't go out, and then he goes out and has dinner with his family. You know, good for thee, not for me. I understand that.
Yeah.
But it's also possible, Dr. Fauci's, let's go back to Dr. Fauci, that what we knew about the virus in March is way different than what we know about it in August because we'd never been through something. It's possible that even as and I don't want a doctor that can't change his opinion when he sees that he's wrong. So there's my stance on that now. Okay, good. Now back to your research, sir.
Yeah. So I want to acknowledge some limitations of what I did.
Okay.
Because I think that's always important because I find that I get the best experience when I am utterly open about where I think I may have screwed up or where there may be some opportunities for improvement. And those are one, I mentioned this earlier, but the fact that these were Zoom versus in person. It may well be that, and I'm basing my research off of a guy by the name of Gordon Allport, who did a lot of what we call intergroup contact research between different racial groups and cultural groups, and it's been expanded to other stuff since then. But the notion that when you bring people together from differing groups and you bring them and they are able to have they're able to engage in a dialogue in which they are able to identify common values, common ground, a common purpose, and they are given what we call institutional sanction, right? That the broader culture of the moment is supporting a quality interaction between those people, right? Then it will decrease prejudice between members of those groups. These are sort of the four components that you have to have: common goals, common values, institutional sanction, and now my brain is forgetting the fourth one that I said. But effectively, that was the idea. And that is going to be something that is likely to be more enhanced, I would suggest, when it's an in-person interaction versus over Zoom, right? Like if you and I, Clint, are having a conversation over Zoom versus in person, and I say something that really, really grates on you, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe, I insult your mom or something, who knows, right? I'm immediately taking a risk. The risk of waking up a few seconds later after having been clocked, right? And so it sort of mitigates some of or lessens our inclination to be jerks to each other.
Well, I'll just boil it down. I mean, we say this all the time. It's keyboard tough guys,
right?
And it's way easier to call me. I can call you all kinds of names right here, and then shut my computer and go to sleep. But if I'm in front of you, Matt's might reach across and put some handprints on my face and go, now let's keep talking. And I'll go, oh, I can't say that anymore. I've crossed the line, sir. Yeah, I get it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So my thought going into doing this research was, I really need to do this in person because that's where you're going to get the biggest effect. I couldn't do that. Now, the fact that I got an effect and that it was likely to improve intergroup attitude or reduce prejudice, whichever, says that ideally that means that the in-person effect would actually be bigger. So I may actually be underestimating how big of an effect this actually was. And I want to kind of put a pretty fine point on that and juxtapose it against what we see in almost all of the prejudice research that I've looked at, especially in terms of how we do anti-bias training and diversity training and all of this stuff that, from everything that I'm seeing, either has no effect or it makes things worse. It actually gets people annoyed. I can imagine especially conservatives being told that they need to be more open-minded, right, by their boss about people of whatever group. I can easily see that getting people's hackles.
Well, you can see it now. If you're in a business and you're getting mandated to take diversity training, you can see conservatives. It's not that they don't care. It's just I'm mandating you take something.
Right.
Yeah. So,
and it's a corporate CYA.
Yeah.
It's not designed, from what I can tell, it's not actually designed to create any kind of improved relationships or healing of any kind. It's designed to click a box. One of our employees at Starbucks did something offensive. Now we're going to shut all of our stores down and do sensitivity training for a couple of days, and that'll fix all of our problems.
It fix it in if it goes to court. So I didn't mean to interrupt
Precisely.
you. Yeah, I get you. Yeah.
It's a legal CYA.
Yeah.
That's all it is. It says that they did something.
Right.
There's no follow-up to say, well, did you measure to see if this had any kind of a good effect on your people?
You know what I would challenge people is to go research that, because I think if you researched it, you would be surprised to find that it probably did not.
Almost certainly has, and that has been looked at by several studies. Everything I've seen has indicated that it either is neutral or it makes things worse. Yeah.
Okay. I interrupted you when you were talking about your 4 pillars. I apologize.
Yeah. So anyway, I just want to sort of caveat the results and just say that it may well be that they're actually stronger than I'm reporting. The other thing that I kind of want to note is that I did pay people to participate. I gave them $10 Amazon gift cards. That's how I recruited them through Craigslist, right? So some of the folks that came into this may or may not have been just doing it for the money. I didn't get that impression in talking to any of them. Everybody was very positive. But I just want to acknowledge, yes, I did pay people to do this.
I don't know if, I get that, but I don't know if that denomination would, I think it was a nice, get them to click and headline to entice them, but I don't know if anybody's going to spend this much time on it, but thank you. I agree.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And the other thing is, it was a very short conversation, 20 minutes, right? To my participants' point, this sort of thing, ultimately, all my research serves to do at best is suggest or provide maybe sort of an initial blueprint. This is a first attempt. And the real hard work of getting people to understand each other and look past all this stuff and discover that common ground is likely going to be something that is a longer term project. And I'll use myself as an example. When I worked in cancer research, 5 of the 8 years that I was working in that field, I shared my office with a conservative woman who's a dear friend of mine now, has been for a long time. And that was a constant daily opportunity to sort of notice things that were happening on the news and talk about it. And she would give me her perspective and I would give her mine. And we would inevitably come to some form of agreement, even if it wasn't about absolutely everything. Right? In Kids in Cages, we could both sit there and say, you know what, Matthew, you're right. This, Kids in Cages is not optimal.
Not
we
a
need
good
to
look.
change this.
Yes.
This is bad. However, and then I could respond and say, you know what, but you're also right, that something has to happen.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we're not going to be able to keep these kids easily with their parents. Do we want the kids to be in some form of prison? Right? This is not an easy thing to solve right now. And we need to have a public conversation. We need to have better options on the table. And we can't just let everybody run into the country willy-nilly without having some kind of vetting.
Well, and I think there was a study, just to sidetrack for a second, and there was a short period. I'm not saying overall, so somebody can pull up the article and prove me wrong, but there was like 400 kids or 300 kids that they were saying that weren't relocated with their families or brought back together. But then if you do the research on it, a lot of those kids, actually more than half, the parents didn't come back because they either weren't the parents or the parents had gone back home and were not coming back over anyway. So like everything we've talked about, though, Matthew, usually in the headline is enough truth to get you to think you know what it's saying. But if you read articles and find out, you'll realize that half the article you'll agree with, the other half will make you think. The whole lazy man's way to these conversations is why I love what you're doing. And do you have time for me to bring up just another 10 minutes or less, maybe 5 minutes? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the things you just said, though, was you were mentioning some limitations of your research. You were owning some stuff. And did you get all that out before I asked you this question? Was there any more limitations you wanted to bring up?
Those are the big ones. Okay. Yeah.
Well, the one about being in person, was your takeaway, because I'm trying to dumb it down for me. Was your takeaway that it would have been more accurate in person or less? Because I'll give you my opinion on that, but do you think more or less accurate in person?
I think it would have improved intergroup attitude more if we had been having these conversations in person. And this comes out of Allport's research, and this is one of the most researched hypotheses in all of psychology. I've several big studies that themselves were analyzing other studies. We call that a meta-analysis, that I used as part of my research to prepare me for this study. And three of those big meta-analyses were looking at how many, like all of the studies that have been done under this umbrella, right? And there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these studies that have been done. And it's almost exclusively they're trying to get as close to in-person as possible. And that is the greatest effect, is when you find the opportunity to actually do this stuff in person.
See, yeah. And I have to bow to science. I don't know. My gut said almost the opposite, because if, let's say I do walk into a room and it's a surprise visit and I'm a female and I'm across from a male, right? Or you're big and I'm small, or I just don't like confrontation, but I've got a screen in between me. I would have thought, it surprises me, I would have thought the research would have shown I'm more likely to be authentic now I'm not talking about the social media post, but when I'm in a one-on-one engagement like this, I would have thought I would have been empowered to actually say what I truly feel without fearing or having the intimidation factor of this could get emotionally and I'll have to deal. Now I'm dealing with an emotional person. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's a certain threat.
Yeah,
with like being in person.
Well, yeah. I just feel like I would be more liable right now to go, you know what, dude, I think that's just biased as crap, and I can't believe that. And in person, and that may be what I really feel, but in the real person, I may go, oh, I see your point. You know, I don't want to get smacked, or I don't want to have an argument in person. I don't handle conflict. But again, that's one opinion versus the research done by a bunch of people that are smarter than Clint. So we'll bow to you on that one.
I want to say some of my participants commented on that as well. Many of them would have preferred to have had it in person.
Yeah.
Others would have preferred to have had a group. So it varied. You may be right. There may be, especially in the case of, if you're a smaller person suddenly being put in the room with, giant mountain of a man, who maybe looks intimidating for whatever reason.
Well, I'm
I can
animated.
see how that would be.
Well, I'm animated. So
Yeah.
if I'm talking to the wrong person, I can come across a little aggressive because I like to talk. I mean, like this, right?
Yeah.
And if you, again, I think research, and you're much better at this, but I think enough research would take into account of that. The more participants you have, the more that would all probably work the norms back out, as
Sure.
I kind of smooth the sheets out on the bed, as I like to say. It gets the wrinkles out if you do enough research. But I love the fact, that you're doing it. And again, you've got all the research and I don't. So Alexandria says that's why so many Republicans voted for Trump and continue to be part of his base, because Trump is the epitome of the anti-yes man. He did not like, he did not do like he was told, hence being a person that doesn't like to be told what to do versus the establishment. What so many others would do in this hostile environment, which would be use that as an opportunity to find something your colleague did wrong and report it to HR. Yeah. So I think she's referring to two separate things there. One is the Trump phenomenon, and the other is you and your colleague. And that's the other thing that bothers me on social media. If you scroll through social media now, I'll actually see people say, I'm reporting this as hate speech, when in reality, they're talking about policies. I go up and I'll reread it and I go, I don't know how that's hate speech. They're talking about, I don't get it. But the reporting of stuff rather than engaging in the why of stuff is so easy to do when there's this anonymity.
Yeah. And it's such a dishonest approach in my mind to how to understand and interpret and respond to what someone else is saying. The whole notion of, I don't want to get too distracted because I could go on, but the whole notion of hate speech presumes that you know what the motivations of the other person is, when you actually know how they feel about the person or the group that they're referring to, that they're talking about, that you know their intentions. And frankly, I have a hard enough time figuring out what my wife or son's intentions are half the time. There's no way I'm going to be able to do that about some random person on the internet who says something I don't like. So I'm extremely wary of the entire idea of hate speech. Anyone who tries to take it on and make use of it, in my mind, is giving themselves a level of understanding of the world or that I don't think anyone has.
I think people I think people like you and Eric are well educated and you're thoughtful speakers. I use words all the time. Sometimes I use them correctly. Sometimes I just butcher the ever loving crap out of them. But I think we have done such a disservice to the power of words. And I brought this up earlier. When you use a word simply as a Band-Aid over a hole that you refuse to investigate, or for no hole at all, you're just throwing up Band-Aids so everything looks like a cut when there may not be cuts under there. So when you start using words like hate speech, there is real hate speech out there. But again, and I hate to keep using the analogy, but you never know who watches these videos. If everybody's a racist and a Nazi and un-American and a Marxist and everybody's using hate speech, then it's like the real people can hide amongst the normal people, and we're all arguing about the definitions, and real evil is amongst us. When me and you can differ on policies, I bet if we were talking about policies, this would have more points of contention. But we could all turn right to the real racist in the room, or we could turn to the Nazis that are the white supremacists, or the insert real whatever it is. We would turn together and go, oh, those are bad ideas. We are going to actually surround your bad idea with so many good ideas that your bad idea, we're not going to tell you to shut up, keep talking, just nobody will hear you. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, there's a certain level of conversational intolerance, in a way, is as a norm, is important. I don't want to assume, or I don't want to suggest, I should say, that should always be how we handle it, because I don't, and maybe I'm just too much of an optimist. Maybe I've paid too much attention to people like Daryl Davis and Dia Khan, who have befriended and effectively deconverted members of the KKK and other white supremacist groups. But I genuinely think that if we do open ourselves up to those people and we do genuinely engage with them, and in fact, those are the folks who have the most to gain. And the research actually on intergroup contact supports that idea, that when you get the people who are farthest away from each other to engage with the other side, that the benefit is greatest to them in terms of reducing prejudice compared to anybody else. They have the most to gain. And I don't want to exclude them from the possibility, and I remember, gosh, it was 2017, maybe 18. This was right after Richard Spencer, noted white supremacist, had gotten punched on live television in, I want to say, DC or something like that. And I had all of my people on the left, friends and family and associates, saying, "Yeah, punch Nazis." And I had to turn to them and say, "Okay, what if it's a disabled Nazi? What if it's the child of a Nazi? Do I get to bring a weapon? Do I get to stab the Nazi? Do I get to put a Monteleone choke on him and choke him into unconsciousness?"
Don't start bringing up jiu-jitsu. What are you doing, Mr. Trey? Don't do
Like, what do I get to do?
Yeah.
Like, where's the limit? Where, and it struck me as such simplistic thinking and a refusal to acknowledge what honestly I think is a strength of the leftist position, which is that very, very open attitude that, like, I'm going to try to be as sympathetic as I can possibly be, right? And that's what I see being lost. It's a strength, and we shouldn't lose it.
But I think that's what happens when you diminish the power of your words and real labels. That's I think you both sides let go of the strength of those words. And we said this yesterday. If everybody is a Nazi, right? If everybody is a racist, both sides.
And nobody is.
Well, nobody is, and it justifies whatever I want to do to you. I mean, dude, he's a Nazi. He's a racist. There's 74 million racists now. 74 million racists. So we should be able to do whatever we want to. Now, Maxine Waters can scream whatever she wants to and tell people to go get in their face and violence. That's not inciting. And if I say anything about her, do you know what that makes me? I hate women and black people. And in reality, I would say the same thing. I didn't like what Trump said, a lot of stuff. So you have to somehow have good faith conversations and us look at it and go, you know what? It's possible that people of all colors and on both sides say things that I don't want my kids to learn. I would never want my kids to learn that it's okay to punch somebody unless it's in self-defense. I don't want them to choke you out unless you're trying to beat them up. And then it's, we put you in the old WWE sleeper. We lift your arm 3 times until it falls down. And so I to your point, and it frustrates me a little bit. And this was why I want to have you back on. That somehow the conservatives are so crappy storytellers that we feel we're not the party to be inclusive. That bothers. And I think with Trump, this is the thing that flips people's mind about stats, right? He made huge ingrounds with the Hispanics and the black males and women even. Where he lost more voters was the white males.
White men.
And we're raised. I don't in my brain. But if I say that to the wrong person, they're like, oh, they dismiss it anyway. And I've kept you too long, so I want to bring up just a couple things and read one more comment. Well, I asked you that question offline because when they were given the summaries, remember back, go to the second part, I think it was, or the third, when they had to say the summary back to the person. I wonder how many corrections there were. I wonder if there were a lot of people that said, no, that's not exactly what I said. I wonder if there was a lot of corrections in that.
That group had a total of 10 people in it. So 5 liberals, 5 conservatives. I remember that happening maybe once or twice.
Okay. All right.
But almost overwhelmingly, people did great.
And I'm going to throw a name out of here in a minute. So Mike Thompson, last 2 comments. I hate every time people post comments, I hate to leave them unsaid. versus what so many others would do. Oh, we already read that one. Mike Thompson said, there we go. Wait a minute. Hold on a second. There we go. January 6th was a good example of the bad folks hiding amongst the innocents. You know what? I agree with that. And I think, to be honest with you, I think we would all be surprised when the curtain is pulled back on things. I think that's a lot what was happening this summer too. I think there was a large group. It might have been a bigger group of people hiding amongst the innocents, right? But I think we see it now. I mean, Antifa this past weekend had violence, and President Biden's in control now. So there's just groups of people that never let a crisis go to waste, and they try to manipulate it. And they make hay off us arguing and lobbing headlines at each other. I'm getting ready to ask you for what surprised you the most out of your research. But as you're thinking, I want to throw this name out at you. When you were watching their body language, this is where I get to tell you what I think you should do next, and you get to agree with me, and then off the air go, "You're so full of crap. Don't ever do that to me again, dude." I got thick skin. So a good friend of mine is written many books, and she's got her doctorate, and she's a body language doctor. Okay. She's been on many shows around the United States. I think it would be interesting, even if it's not for research, to have a podcast with you to watch the videotapes with her and let her get her take on stuff. Because I've had her on many podcasts and stuff, man. And we did one she's got a book called The Body Language of Politics. And it is fascinating when you sit down, and you may have had somebody like that on your staff, but that's her expertise to watch body language and tics. And that would be pretty cool down the road.
Yeah, I thought about doing something like that. I just didn't have the expertise that I needed.
Dr. Donna Van Natten.
Okay.
There she is. I'm giving her a shout out right now. She's local and she is awesome.
It's one of the things I've been considering doing for the next phase when I start expanding this. And as I'm shifting into a PhD program to look at this specifically, is to incorporate a bunch of new analyses. Things like body language are on my short list. I can't, that I know of, I didn't get consent from my participants to go back and show any of the videos of their conversations publicly. So that would require a completely new arrangement with all of my participants. However, I'm completely open to doing it going forward. Yeah.
You know what would be fun is I'll send you an email and with her, and then after I introduce you, you can never talk to her again, or you can reach out on your own. It doesn't matter. So I've wasted 81 minutes of your life, sir.
Not a waste.
Tell me the surprises. What was your personal takeaway from this? Good, bad, indifferent. The floor is yours.
I think the thing that surprised me the most, and I don't have data to back this up. This is a hunch. But what surprised me the most was how the sort of pre-conversation discussions, if that makes sense, may have influenced how the conversations took place. So in a lot of cases, right, you're getting people online and like making sure mics are checked and stuff's happening around you, and maybe you're, the person's cat's over here or their kid comes in with something, and that wasn't part of the recorded conversation. I didn't have that transcribed, right? But I had several folks after in the interviews who would just comment, it was nice to see that bit of it just humanized them, right? We talked about our cats for a few minutes before we started our 20-minute conversation, or we talked about, having kids or being married, or, whatever happened to be kind of in the environment that might trigger that. And then probably the second thing being, I don't think I anticipated how my influence as sort of the person who's there to be supportive and is trying to create, right, this positive experience. I didn't account for that. And I don't know how much my demeanor and how I was interacting with people influenced them. And that's one of the things that I'm hoping to test a little bit more, is to vary up that process and who's involved, and it shouldn't just be me necessarily, and figure out what happens there. So yeah, those are the two things that I'm probably most excited to follow up on.
Well, you and I talked yesterday with Eric Buchanan about the organization Braver Angels, which kind of, takes this approach of getting people together, differing views, get to know them, learn how to talk through problems. I will say one thing after talking with you that is encouraging, and it affirms what I kind of believe, is that once we humanize what's behind the headlines and the opinions, it forces you to agree that there's some common ground. And my hope is that somehow these little conversations like you and I are having, they may affect 5 people or 10 people. It may affect one, but it may be the right one to start something else. Because the search for us to find common ground as Americans, I think, is key. We have to have some touchstones that we can stay in the same neighborhoods, because I said it yesterday, I don't know of another country that tries to have the country where you have with all of the different perspectives and cultures and races, and then say, now, you boys and girls, sort this out. Y'all go find some commonality, and you got to do it in a way that keeps those documents intact, I think. So the common ground part of it is what encourages me, and I think what you're doing is fantastic, dude. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I think
e pluribus unum, right?
Absolutely. Hey, so real quick, what's your timeline? When are you working on the other research now? Is it in the pipeline? Where are you at in that scenario?
I'm in the design phase and the figuring out where the funding is going to come from phase. It's probably going to be about a 2.5-3 year project, and I'm going to be blowing it up much bigger than it was before. This was a pilot study, and the next phase is going to be much bigger. So yeah, this is going to be a bit of time that it's going to take, and I think I might have mentioned this when we were talking with Eric, but one of the things I'm really excited to see if I can do is get half my funding from a conservative grant organization and the other half from a liberal conservative grant or liberal grant foundation, to just sort of continue to sort of live out the very values that I'm trying to inculcate in my participants.
That would be interesting. I hope you do. I hope it works out. I would love, and I think your response from Eric yesterday is, I look forward to you being part of these conversations going forward as much as we can. But if by any chance this platform can help, I would love to utilize it. And I hate to say this, but I'm not really good at a lot, but I know a lot of people. So if down the road there's any resources you think I can at least introduce you to, I know other smart people like you and Eric. I've got other people that I can introduce you to. I can't do jack for you, but I know the other people can.
Everybody can do their part.
That's right.
Yeah. If this helps even that one person, then it was all worth it.
Well, here's what I know. We've been talking for an hour and a half almost. And I know that if people have been watching this, they weren't scrolling social media and they saw 2 people talking about how things I think should be or could be. And they've been introduced to somebody that's doing something about it, which is you. And I appreciate it very much, sir.
Happy to do it.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Let's wrap this one up, and we'll do it again soon.
Sounds good.
Bye, man.
Take care, everybody.
See you, buddy.
Bye.
Thank y'all.